Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I am here every Wednesday, noon Eastern Standard Time, taking a topic, deep diving, having a good time while doing it. Before we get into it, and as you guys are signing on, do me a favor, say what's up. Jesse, what's going on, brother man? Good to see you. Caceres, what's up, brother man? Good to see you. I'm setting up my stuff over here. But as we're doing that and you guys are jumping on, what's up, Jamie? Little Goose in the house. What's up, my man? I was just talking to your dad a little earlier. What do we got going on? If you guys are not getting my emails, you are messing up. Make sure you go to masterchimletter.com. Links in the description and all that good stuff. Make it happen. Big Mike, round 2 with MC, I see. What's up, brother, man? Corey, what's up, brother? Good to see you. All right. So, what's doing here? So, the point of today's conversation is, I sit down and I try to determine. What does Aaron says here? What's up, Aaron? Says, sorry for my dramatic and stressed out comments last week. Chick deleted my comments and nothing ever happened. I'm glad it all worked out, Aaron. Don't worry. So today's, topic came from my usual process, right? So every week I sit down and I'm asking myself, all right, what can I talk about that people are going to be able to use? But then there's that sort of overlap that I have to consider of that is also interesting, for people, because there's plenty of stuff that I could tell people they could use, but the overwhelming majority of that stuff, people want nothing to do with listening to, right? So that is the game, right? The game that I'm playing. So today's topic stemmed from that process. And what I settled on was a conversation about how to have a tough conversation. If I could point out something that most men are deficient in, it is saying things that may be unpopular or hearing things that are unpopular, right? Exposing themselves to the pressure that stems from saying things nobody wants to hear, or being able to withstand the pressure of hearing things that you may not necessarily want to hear. This is where a lot of men are deficient. And I would say when I was growing up, there was this paradox, or it presented itself as a paradox because I didn't understand it. But there was this collection. There was a collection of men that I knew in business, in the neighborhood, people that I interact with, older gentlemen that I interacted with, that weren't necessarily nice. They weren't even necessarily pleasant. But for some reason, they were successful. They were respected. They had longtime friends. They were, plugged into a network of people who didn't seemingly, have similar, personalities and temperaments. But there was something about these guys that everybody seemed to value. And admittedly, when I was a young man, I couldn't exactly put my finger on it, right? For as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be respected by respectable men. The guys that I look up to, the guys that sort of modeled the type of behavior that I wanted to model or lived the types of lives that I wanted to live as an older person, when I was a young man, teenager, what have you. Like a lot of these guys didn't always be the nicest. They weren't always being the nicest. They weren't always the ones that made people laugh, smile, etc. I will say that as I got older, one attribute that was very, very prevalent in these types of individuals was the ability to have a tough conversation. To have a tough conversation in a way that they still preserved their alliances, in a way that the people they were having a tough conversation with didn't take it as a sort of personal affront. They didn't look to personalize it. It didn't devolve into some sort of ad hominem, attack. They could just talk about stuff that wasn't necessarily pleasant to hear, but it had to be said, and they squared it away. Johnny Groove, what's up, brother man? Good to see you. So in today's email, let me bring it up. As I usually do, I pose a couple of questions. And these questions, serve a lot of times as a framework for the conversation. Admittedly, though, I actually created a list. I wanted to create a list on the 5 steps on how to have a tough conversation. The questions that I put in today's email. Why do men avoid tough talks? A lot of times it's very hard for somebody to hear things they don't want to hear because of the inclination that these men have to personalize it. They take everything as an insult, everything as an offense. They become very insecure. They feel like the conversation is treading into territories where they know they are vulnerable. So they look to sort of deflect the conversation into an area they feel more confident defending. And that's usually making it a personal thing. I didn't do my job. Well, how about you doing your job? Yesterday I saw, and it's like, there we go. We've gotten away from the topic at hand. So why do certain men, not all men, but why do men avoid tough talks? Usually because it tends to spotlight their vulnerabilities. It tends to spotlight their deficiencies. It tends to sort of spotlight the mistakes that they've made, and they don't necessarily want to acknowledge them, let alone take on the accountability for having done them. Why do men need to be fired up? The question I posed in the email. Or worse yet, why do men have to be fired up or angry to finally have them? If you guys recall, a couple of weeks back, I had a live stream on what I called the man dragon. And the man dragon I represented as that part of our personality where the fire resides. And some men, in order to have a tough conversation, they need to transform into that heightened dragon state in order to have it. Well, why is that? Because they, again, feel a vulnerability. In order to have this conversation, one of the things about adorning the dragon is that you are also armored up. You are more formidable. You're more intimidating. It tends to give you a little bit more control. It tends to protect you a little bit more when you're in that state. And a lot of men need to be fired up, or they need to be angry to have tough conversations because they would feel vulnerable otherwise. How can, this is the last question that I posed here, how can a man send the necessary information in one of these tough conversations while keeping the alliance intact? And it's off of that question that I developed this process. And again, like this process, this isn't fucking mind-blowing stuff. This isn't something that I created, invented. I coined this phrase or this 5-step process to just make it a little bit more manageable, to make it easier for somebody to apply to their own life. It's to sort of make things clearer on the mission at hand when you're having these tough conversations. A lot of times emotion will fill a void that ignorance maintains. So finding out the dynamics that are involved in a tough conversation is the first step towards being less vulnerable emotionally to them. All right. So let's get into, and I didn't prep the screens or everything. I'm looking at it. I'm like, why didn't I put it on the screens? But what are you going to do? I'm an army of one with these things. So you guys will be all right. So let's get into the 5 steps to having a tough conversation. Step 1. Get clear. Step 1 is get clear. Now, if we're going to have a conversation that has any potential conflict, in it, or, you anticipate some sort of friction during the process of this conversation, there is something to be said about the internal step of understanding what mission is first. You want to understand what the end goal is of this conversation. So let's say I'm about to have a conversation with my neighbor, right? My neighbor is having noise on, too late, too loud, and it's fucking up everybody's sleep. Let's say that's the tough conversation I'm about to have. And before I go over to his house, step one is I get clear on exactly what it is that I'm doing. What's my end goal? My end goal is he agrees to stop playing loud music at a reasonable hour. He agrees to, if he is going to play loud music, to relegate it to, the weekend or something like that. So I'm going to understand what my end goal is. I'm also going to understand what are the non-negotiables. The non-negotiables is not, I'm going to let him do whatever he wants, and sometimes he will, sometimes he won't. Maybe that's a non-negotiable. A non-negotiable would be agreeing to, put on headphones, when he's playing these things, and hey, like if he says, hey, I'll buy you all headphones when I'm having a party, you put on the headphones, like it's non-negotiable. Maybe it's, hey, when I'm having one of these parties and I'm playing music loudly, you guys should come over. No, non-negotiable. It's not going to be something that I'm going to agree to. I understand exactly what I want from the conversation. And again, this is an internal step, right? So of the 5 steps we have to having a conversation, a tough conversation, step 1 is get clear. Jan Saxa, what's going on, Don? Good to see you. All right, so let's get into step 2. So step 2, set the stage, right? Set the stage. I really should have wrote these things down for the screen and everything, but hopefully you guys forgive me. So setting the stage is now we're actually talking to the guy, right? I knock on the neighbor's door. He opens it up. I understand my end goal, my mission. I understand the non-negotiables. Now I'm there. He opens, and I want to set the stage for the conversation. That's step 2. So what does that entail? I open with an honest sharing of the context of this conversation I am instigating. I want to establish what the purpose of this conversation is. I want my neighbor in this case to understand why I'm at his doorway talking to him. I'm not going to, hey, how the weather's been? Oh, hey, did you get a package from UPS that was mistakenly sent here? Or, hey, want to go fishing later? I'm not going to go there under false pretenses and then segue into the uncomfortable topic. I'm going to right there and then, I'm going to be honest. I'm like, hey, what's going on? The reason I'm here is, listen, you've been playing, music at night pretty late, and, it's really interfering with the sleep that's going on. And I just wanted to come to some sort of, a resolution. Let's find a way to fix this so that both of us are happy, right? So that's setting the stage. Now, here's the thing about setting the stage. It ends with a segue. I could have created another step here. I refused because 6 didn't sound as good as 5. So this is, we could say 2B, right? It's the end of 2, the end of step 2. After we've set the stage, we're going to sort of line up step 3. So the segue from step 2 to step 3 is you're going to finish the stage by saying, this is what I see and this is why I'm here. I really like to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this? So step 3 then is listen and mirror. So what do I mean by listen and mirror? Number 1, I want him to have a place in this conversation. Number 1, I want to validate his opinion. He's going to have a take on this. I want him to have his take and put it on the table. I want that to be part of this conversation, part of this exchange. So I'm going to hear him out. I'm going to ask him to clarify anything that he's saying if I think it's ambiguous. If he says, well, I only play loud music at a reasonable time. Okay, what time do you think is reasonable? Like, these are clarifying questions. I want to sort of, figure out exactly what he means by what it is that he's saying. If he says, well, I don't play music loudly, I could ask, well, what would you consider to be loud? If I'm in my living room, would you consider that to be loud? Or would it have to be disruptively loud? Or I want to know exactly what he means. So at the end of step 2, right, which is set the stage, I sort of prompt him to give me his opinion. Step 3 is to actually listen to that opinion and mirror. So when I say mirror, I want to connect with what it is that he's saying in a way that he sees that I see it. Does that make sense? Right? He understands that I am understanding him. If he's telling me his opinion, I want him to feel that I have adequately comprehended his opinion, right? Clarifying where I feel is necessary, right? So step 1, I'm getting clear. This is an internal step. This is the pre-conversation step. I'm going to say, okay, this is the mission. This is my end goal. This is my target. These are the non-negotiables. I know exactly what I want out of this conversation. Step 2 is I set the stage. I initiate the conversation and I explain honestly why I'm here, what the purpose of this talk is, what my initial take is on everything. I will even share with him, what I'm trying to achieve. I'll be open and honest. After I do that, I then prompt him to give me his take on it. And that is, I wrote something here. This is the situation. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think? And then step 3 is him answering and we are listening. And listen and mirror. I want to hear him out. I want him to understand that I respect him as an individual. I want him to see that his opinion on this whole thing is being considered. It's part of the conversation. I'm not going to sit here barking orders at him, giving him commands, and sort of threatening or looking to intimidate him to comply, because then that might prompt an existential threat. Right? He might agree with me once I've broken it down, but because I disrespected him in his eyes, he's just going to say, well, fuck you, just for the hell of it, because he feels like somebody's, like overstepping their boundaries, right? So step 3 is listen and mirror. At the end of step 3, you should have, they should have said their piece, and you should understand what it is that they've exactly said. At the end of step 3, that's exactly what needs to happen, right? So let's get to step 4. Step 4 is where we state our case, right? So step 4 is state your case. What are we looking to do here? We want to present our position firmly, but calmly. Firmly, but calmly. In the scenario of me talking to my neighbor about him playing, music too loudly, it's going to be, well, past 7 o'clock, my house is winding down. The kids are winding down. We might watch a TV program or something. We might, after dinner, have a conversation around the fire, in the living room, what have you. So it's not something that I'm willing to accept, that I'm not going to be able to do that. So we got to find that is me stating it firmly. That's not me being antagonistic. That's not me being super emotional. I don't give a fuck. All I know is there better not be any music past 7 o'clock. Like, that is not going to go anywhere, right? Maybe you intimidate the guy, but that's not exactly having a tough conversation. That's threatening somebody successfully, right? Or effectively. That's a completely different strategy. We're trying to have a tough conversation. We want to preserve the alliance, right? The viability of the alliance. So I'm going to state my case, and I'm going to say it firmly. I'm going to say it calmly. I'm going to focus on specific solutions. I'm not going to keep my expectations abstract. I want to show up with specific ways that this could be resolved. It's going to be much easier for him to accept a proposal than it is for him in the moment, depending on how he's processing all this, to creatively come up with his own solution. He may very well do that as a rebuttal at this step of the process. You say, well, listen, past 7 o'clock, I would really appreciate if you just didn't. And he's like, well, you know what? Every day at 7 o'clock, I have a band rehearsal, so that's not going to work for me, right? And that's valid information, and we're going to have to adjust accordingly. But understanding what it is that I'm saying should be specific, or I should say he should understand specifically what it is that I'm saying. I want to refer to established protocols and expectations where possible. So what do I mean by that? Is he going against something that he's already agreed to? Is he going against something that uh, commonly would be considered ethical, or moral in some cases? Can I leverage his desire to be looked at as a respectable individual, an ethical individual? Can I bring up those things as leverage to get him to see why my solution should be accepted? This is one of the things that I'm going to focus on, because at this step, I'm stating my case, right? So this is different from step two. Step two, I set the stage. I introduced what we're about to talk about. I introduced my points of contention. I presented to him, and then I segued into three, where I let him tell me his thoughts on it. This is different from that introduction to the conversation. This is now given, I've allowed him to speak, which is also, significant. It's important to recognize I did let him speak. And after he spoke and I listened to him, legitimately listened to him in a way that he felt that I was listening to him, I then begin to state my case. So the understanding on his part is that I've considered what he said, and this is what it is that I'm proposing. The more it's important to, at this step, that you understand, the more emotional you seem, the more likely they are to take it as a personal attack. We don't want to add energy to this communication, because if I give somebody, I'm going to make something up here. If I give somebody a letter, right? I've written a letter and there's a bunch of very valuable stuff in this letter. But this letter is so hot, it's hard for somebody to hold the letter. And I hand him that letter. He's never going to get a chance to read it because of how the temperature of the letter itself is affecting him. And that's going to be where his attention is drawn. When you add energy to you stating your case unnecessarily, it's the energy that is going to appear on his radar first, and it's the energy that usually an individual is going to deal with first, right? So you want to make sure that you're not adding energy to it. You want to be very matter of fact, very steady in how it is that you're delivering this. So now, the final stage. On the final stage, we want to, name of the step, lock it in. So step one, let's go over the names. Step one, get clear. What is it that I'm going to talk to this guy about? Step two, I set the stage. I let him know what it is that we're talking about, what I'm trying to accomplish. Step three, I allow him to give me his feedback, and I listen to him, effectively listen to him, mirror that in an engaged exchange with him. Step four, he gave his case, I now state my own. I do it firmly, right? No energy. I'm not going to add any spice, to this meal. And finally, step five, lock it in. So what does lock it in mean? At the end of stating our case, we should have an understanding of what it is we're going to walk away from. Now, even if it's just a disagreement, I've stated my case. He stated his case, and I gave him my reaction. I've stated my case. He has the opportunity to give me his reaction. At some point, we find that middle ground. Now, maybe that middle ground is fuck you, and he goes, no, fuck you. It would be unfortunate if after all this preparation, that's the outcome of it. But that is a possibility. But still, whatever the case is, at step five, when we're locking it in, we're summarizing the agreed upon outcome. We're defining what the next steps look like. We're confirming what each one of us is going to do. I'm going to do this. You're going to do this. And contingencies are going to be included in that. So what do I mean by that? You're going to tell the guy something to the effect of, okay, if we do X, then we can expect Y. But if you do A, expect me to do B. Having clarity of what it is that we do and what the outcomes of those actions are going to be is very important, because you conclude then with a much more effective level of expectations. You gain the ground that was possible to gain in a best case scenario, which I think if done thoughtfully, the way that I've described it will be the majority of the scenarios, you'll wind up coming to a reasonable, compromise. You will find a way to solve this issue, right? So once again, let's go over these steps. Step one, get clear. This is the internal step. Step two, set the stage. Tell them, hey, this is something I wanted to talk to you about. I hope we could address this, blah, blah, blah. You finish step 2 with, and what do you think? I want to know your thoughts on this, which gets us to step 3, listen and mirror. Make sure that they're able to say their piece and that you understand what they've said. Step 4, now you state your case. Understanding that the more emotional you seem, the more likely they're going to perceive this as a personal attack, right? As an attack on their identity. You don't want to add spice to it unnecessarily. And finally, step 5, lock it in. Whatever we both agreed on, whatever we understand are going to be the next steps, say that out loud. Get them to agree to it. Even the contingencies. Okay, so if this doesn't happen, this is what's going to happen. And whatever is appropriate, we'll populate that content. But the idea of it is you don't want there to be a misunderstanding or some sort of ambivalence as to the cause and effect influence that each one of you has walking away from this conversation. So there you have it, the 5 steps on how to have a tough conversation. So what do we got here? Corey says, I like the hot letter analogy. There is, it took me a long time. That particular aspect of this process took me a long time to understand. I was somebody who was always, growing up, I was always looking for a fight. I was always, and it stemmed from insecurity. It stemmed from a collection of formulas that were aggression driven. I was the guy that thought in order to be in control, in order to be the leader, you had to be the one that could dominate everybody else socially. And that was reflected in how I dealt with conflict back then. And it took me years to realize just how worse I was making, a little bit of friction was turning to all out battles because I was just too hot in my delivery. So when you have somebody that is so accustomed to lathering in or weaving in emotion into their dealings with other people, they're not really getting a good lay of the land, in those circumstances. They're not really understanding, where they are, where the other person is, what is possible, what's negotiable, because there's so much, stray energy, just mix, into the mix between the two of you. And usually, just like the hot letter analogy, that's the thing that gets dealt with first. And before you know it, 2 people are completely deflecting the topic at hand to talk about just the conflict that they created out of nothing, out of nowhere. Yarn Saxa asked one of the universe's mysteries, how does a woman approach that with a man without being emotional? I really do appreciate that you put the LOL. I'm going to say with a lot of practice, with a lot of practice. Let me say something that's not very popular. Go figure. So unlike me. There are a lot of women that I've met, women that I've been exposed to, that are very good at having these tough conversations. They're very good at navigating these conflicts, these potential conflicts or established conflicts with tact, with strategy, with discipline. Not only, how can I say this right? Here I am tripping myself up. I haven't seen a lot of those women also be good wives and mothers. Just fucking say it as I see it. So there is something to be said for women allowing women to be more emotional than we would allow a man to be emotional. And hear me out with this, right? This might make it better or worse for you, right? The explanation I'm going to give. There is a point where we expect our women to love us and our children unconditionally. To love unconditionally is never going to pass a logic test. It's never going to be thought of as rational to love anything unconditionally. Self-preservation is at the heart of our programming as animals, as organisms, as mammals, however you want to label it, as humans, as people. Self-preservation is the top of the food chain. When you love something unconditionally, that is sort of thrown by the wayside, or at least put, away from the primary function and drive of the individual. We want women to love unconditionally, which means we want them as part of their temperament and their approach to alliance, whether it's the alliance as a spouse slash mate or the alliance of a mother to children. We don't want them to run purely on reason. We want them to love unconditionally. It is, I would say, hypocritical then to not allow women to have a more emotional approach and temperament to conflict. I think that we should, and this is, again, it's hard to say this without sounding like, women are fucking useless. They're so fucking stupid. They can't control themselves. That is not my position at all. I just think women play a different role. And in a conflict between two identities, the love that women have is a very effective, valuable sort of social lubricant for conflict. Sometimes women could just love their way through a conflict. It's not as easy for men to do that. Men do not have the freedom in the most natural of perspectives I'm sharing. Men do not have the freedom to love unconditionally. Men need to love functionally. Which means we need to understand that there's a job to be done behind all of this. And it's probably my job to do. So men have to stay focused on the task. Women should be afforded the right to not be so focused on that, which means they should get a little bit of leeway to be irrational, to be emotional, because that is the same engine that we expect them to use to love us when loving us is also irrational for them. Right. So that's my take on that. I hope that made sense. Derek, what's up, brother, man? Good to see you. Hope all is well. Aaron writes, your quote today was very thought-provoking for me. Only the distractible can be distracted. It's a good thing to consider in one's own life. Yeah. It's a point that I make to my martial arts students, my coaching students, my mastermind, my own kids. There's a scenario whereby I created this analogy the other day. I said, yep. So let me share it again. And this is on the distractibility. Only the distractible can be distracted. I gave, and I actually gave this to the boys. All, me and my black belt sons, we were training Sunday, and I posed this to them, at the end of the training, sort of mat chat. We're talking about some stuff, sharing some power. And I gave them the scenario. I said, you have your cousin, a cousin that you love tremendously, just got bit by a snake. And you know that the snake that bit him is venomous, poisonous. Cousin's going to die, has a half an hour to live. However, you find out the antidote to this poison is 10 minutes away, a 10-minute run away. So 10 minutes there, 10 minutes back, it's 20 minutes. He's got 30 minutes. So you got 10 minutes of leeway. But all you got is 10 minutes of leeway. You don't know if you're going to get lost, if you're going to trip. You don't know how long it's going to be once you get to the spot to actually get the antidote. Is it going to be there on the shelf, or do you have to do something to get it? So you don't really have a lot of extra time to spare. You have extra time, but no time to spare. You want every one of those extra 10 minutes for this sort of just in case, aspect of this dilemma that you're facing. So I tell them, okay, so you head out and you start running to go get the antidote. Cousin's going to die in 30 minutes. You got 10 minutes there, get the antidote, 10 minutes back. You'll save him if you make it in time. All of a sudden, there's somebody there, and he calls you a piece of shit. He calls your mother a whore. He calls your father a loser. He calls your family a bunch of bums. What do? And obviously, given the backdrop of that mission, like all the boys were like, well, you fucking ignore him. You got to save. They didn't curse like I curse, right? but they were like, I'm getting excited. They're like, you ignore them. You know, I got to save my cousin. That's right. You got to save your cousin. So somebody calls you. Well, and then, you know, you ask them, well, what would they say where you would stop and tell him to go fuck himself or fight him or, you know, call him something? Like nothing. Doesn't matter what he says. Just words. Got to do something. That's right. What if somebody throws something at you? Somebody throws a pebble at you, throws a rock at you, throws a stick at you, sprays you with a hose. Shits in their hand and throws their shit at you. Hits you right in the back of the head. What do? And you're like, nothing. Got to save my cousin. That's right. Got to save my cousin. So I drew this whole scenario out, creating all these different potential distractions. But they understood if they are distracted by any of the distractions that I proposed, there's a chance their cousin dies. So in that scenario, they are not distractible. Every single time we are distracted during the course of a day, it is because first and foremost, we are distractible. The reason we are distractible is because we do not have a clarity of purpose, a clarity of mission, and the plan to achieve it. We do not have it at that level of development like somebody who's trying to save their cousin from the poison does. It's ambiguous. I want to do a good job today. Well, what the fuck does that mean? I accomplished a lot today. Well, what does that mean? I'm not saying it isn't true. I'm not even saying because you don't have a measurement system for it, it's not true. I'm just saying if we're going to make ourselves as least distractible as possible, we can't spend our time trying to solely eliminate distractions. That is something that later on we can add to our strategy. First and foremost, we have to have clarity of mission. We have to understand when we can wake up every day what we're trying to accomplish. And it's because you don't know what a perfect day looks like, you don't know what a complete victory of today looks like, that we're distractible, right? So I hope that makes sense. Two on Tom. What's up, brother, man? Good to see you. Aaron says, yeah, you can go get him later. You can always do that. Save your cousin and then go make that guy eat the shit that he threw at you. Oh, that's definitely a possibility. All right, guys. Let's call it there. So hope you guys got something out of today. We had the 5 steps. I'm just going to review it one more time. The 5 steps to having a tough conversation. Number 1, get clear. Before you go to talk to them, understand what your mission is. What's the purpose of this tough talk you're about to have? Step 2, set the stage. Introduce to them the purpose of the talk. Hey, this is what's going on. This is what's on my mind. I really just want to address this with you and resolve it. At the end of step 2, we ask them, and I want to get your thoughts on it. What do you think? Which segues into step 3. Listen and mirror. Step 3 is where you give them a chance to be heard. You give them a chance to offer their take on everything. It might be a misunderstanding. They might not be willing to negotiate anything, but it is going to increase the probability of a positive outcome if you let them participate in the process. Step 4, this is now where you state your case. They just got finished stating theirs. Now you state yours. I would caution to not be emotional. The more emotional you are in stating your case, the more likely they are to perceive what you're saying as a personal attack, right? It's the hot letter analogy. You want them to read the letter. You don't want them to grab the letter and go, man, that's fucking hot. They'll never get to read it, right? And finally, step 5, lock it in. Whether it was a full agreement, whether it was a full disagreement, just have them understand at the end, okay, going forward, given what we just discussed, this is what my expectations are. If this happens, then this is what's going to happen as a result. And describe those contingencies. Again, no need for animosity, emotion. If that guy is saying, fuck you, get off my property, I don't want to talk to you, no problem. Just letting you know, moving forward, this is what's going to happen. You know, take it easy. And you lock it in, right? Hopefully all the other steps are done properly and you don't wind up with a bad outcome like that, but it's not always up to you, right? As they say in SIOC, hope is not a plan. All right, guys, I appreciate you all. Make sure you guys are getting my emails. If you're not, links in the descriptions. Like, share, comment, do all that stuff. And I will see you guys next week. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.